Good evening. Somewhere in the dark right now, a telescope is listening, not for sounds, not for voices, but for signals, for patterns, for something that might mean there is someone else out there. And tonight, we are going to follow that listening back through time, thousands of years back to the very first people who ever dared to wonder if they were alone. This is not a story about flying saucers or alien invasions. It is quieter than that. It is the story of a question, a single question that has haunted human beings since we first looked up at the night sky and understood in our bones how vast it was. Are we alone? And the strange, beautiful thing is this. Almost every culture, almost every era, almost every thinking person who has ever lived has asked it, in different ways, with different answers, but always the same question, echoing across centuries. Tonight, we are going to trace that echo, from ancient philosophers who imagined impossible worlds to a man who died rather than take back his beliefs, to the first telescope that showed us the heavens were not what we thought, to the radio astronomers listening right now at this very moment while the world sleeps. And what you are about to discover is this. The answer to the question of whether we are alone might not be hidden in the sky at all. It might be hidden in the choices we made, the fears we held, the beliefs we would not let go of, the dreams we refused to dream. So let us begin, not at the beginning of time, but at the beginning of wondering. Part 1, The Ancient Sky and the First Dreamers. Imagine the night sky as it was 2,000 years ago. You are standing in a place with no electricity, no city lights, no electric hum, no artificial glow staining the horizon. When the sun goes down, true darkness comes, complete, absolute, overwhelming, and with it, a sky so full of stars it is almost impossible to comprehend. The Milky Way stretches from one horizon to the other, bright enough to cast shadows on the ground. Thousands of stars layer behind thousands more. Constellations, so crowded it is hard to pick them out from the sheer, overwhelming glory of it all. The ancient peoples lived beneath this sky every single night of their lives. They knew it the way we know the faces of people we love. They watched the constellations wheel through the seasons, year after year, with perfect faithfulness. They steered ships by them. They planted crops by them. They wove myths around them. Heroes and gods set forever among the stars. The sky was not remote to them. It was close. It was alive. It was intimate. It was woven through everything they did, everything they believed, everything they were. And it was only natural that some of them began to wonder if all those countless points of light were just lamps hung up in heaven for the benefit of Earth, or if something far stranger might be true, if the darkness between the stars might stretch on forever, if it might hold other lands, other shores, other living things, gazing up at their own stars, perhaps asking the same question. One of the first people we know of who dared to ask this question was a man named Lucretius. He lived in the 1st century before Christ was born, and he was a poet and a philosopher. And unlike most thinkers of his time, he was not content to accept the answers that authority gave him. He wanted to reason for himself, to follow logic wherever it led, no matter how strange the destination. And he looked up at the sky, and he thought something extraordinary. He thought that the universe might be infinite, that it stretched on without end in every direction, that there was no edge, no boundary, no limit to it at all. And if it was infinite, he reasoned, then the atoms that made up the earth and all the life upon it must be repeated again and again throughout all that endless space. Which meant there must be countless other worlds out there. Infinite worlds, some like ours, some utterly different. Worlds of stone, worlds of ice, worlds of fire, worlds we could never imagine. And on those worlds, he believed, there must be other beings, not just a few, but countless others, infinite others, all of them scattered throughout an infinite cosmos, each one looking up at their own crowded night sky, perhaps wondering, as we wonder, if they too were alone. He called it the principle of plurality of worlds, and it was a thought born from pure reasoning, with no telescope, no instruments, nothing but the human mind and the courage to follow it wherever it led. It was a beautiful thought, perhaps the most beautiful thought a mind could hold, that we are not unique, that consciousness has arisen again and again in countless places, that we are one voice among infinite voices singing in the dark. But Lucretius lived in a world where such thoughts were not forbidden. They were simply ignored. The powerful thinkers of his time had other ideas, and those ideas would dominate the minds of educated people for more than 1,000 years. One of them was Aristotle. He lived about 300 years before Lucretius, and Aristotle was brilliant, extraordinarily brilliant. He thought carefully, he reasoned methodically, he observed the world with precision, and he came to a very different conclusion about the nature of the heavens. Aristotle believed the universe was closed, finite, enclosed. He imagined it as a series of nested crystal spheres, each one inside the other like layers of an onion or a Russian nesting doll. The stars were fixed to the outermost sphere, embedded in crystal, immobile, eternal. The planets rode on their own transparent spheres. The sun had its sphere. The moon had its sphere. And at the very center, motionless and unchanging, the earth sat at the heart of everything. The entire vast structure turned around the earth. Every night, every star wheeled overhead, turning around us in perfect circles. Every planet, every sphere, every point of light in the heavens, all of it rotated around us, around the ground beneath our feet. And there was no room for other worlds in this system, no place for any universe except the one we lived in. The cosmos was complete, it was perfect, it was harmonious, it was closed, it was ours alone. You can understand why this idea took hold so deeply in the human mind. It was orderly, it was beautiful, it was harmonious, it made sense, and above all, it told every person who looked up that they were at the center of creation, that the entire infinite structure of the heavens turned around them, that they mattered profoundly. Every night the stars wheeled around you. Every planet moved in its appointed path for you. The universe was arranged around you. You were not insignificant. You were essential. You were the reason everything existed. There was deep comfort in that, deep meaning, deep significance. And so Aristotle's vision triumphed over Lucretius's infinity. The powerful voice of authority and tradition overwhelmed the quiet voice of pure reasoning. For more than 1,000 years, this was the universe that educated people believed in. A small, enclosed, closed cosmos with Earth at its heart. The great medieval thinkers accepted it. The Church embraced it. It became orthodoxy. It became unquestionable. The old idea of other worlds did not die completely. Ideas like that are very hard to kill, but it grew quiet. It went underground. It waited, the way a seed waits beneath frozen winter ground, holding still, holding on, through long cold seasons, until at last the warmth returns, and it can stir and grow again. And slowly, across centuries, the season did begin to turn. The great crystal spheres, so perfect and so closed, began to crack. Part 2. The cracks begin to form. The very first crack came from an unexpected place, from inside the church itself, from a man named Nicholas of Cusa. He was a cardinal, a high official, a respected senior man of the church, and he was also a deep thinker who loved to contemplate the true shape and meaning of the universe. Nicholas lived in the 15th century, at a time when the medieval world was beginning to shift and change. New ideas were coming from the East. New technologies were being invented. The world was opening up. And Nicholas, in his study, was opening up in his mind as well. He was a man who valued careful reasoning above all else. He believed that the human mind, properly used, could apprehend truth, and he was not afraid to follow his reasoning wherever it led, even if it contradicted what the authorities had always said. And in his writings, almost in passing, he set down some astonishing ideas. He suggested that the Earth was not, after all, the fixed and motionless center of everything, that it moved, that, in truth, no place in the universe could really claim to be the center at all, that the center was everywhere and nowhere, that perspective mattered. That if you were standing on another world, looking up at the stars, that world would seem to be at the center to you. The perspective of the observer created the center. There was no absolute center. There was only relative centers, infinite centers, each one real from its own point of view. And then he suggested something that would have been unthinkable just decades before. That the stars were not lamps fixed to a sphere, that they were not ornaments hung in heaven for the benefit of earth, that they might be other suns blazing in the distant dark like our own sun. And on those other suns, he suggested, there might be worlds, and on those worlds there might be inhabitants, beings suited to their own world, adapted to their own conditions, just as we are adapted to ours. He had no proof. He was simply reasoning in the dark, following a thought wherever it led, the way a mind likes to wander as it grows tired and loose and free in the stillness of study. But it was a beginning. A small light struck in a long-closed room. And not long after Nicholas came another thinker, a man named Giordano Bruno, but between them there came an even more important figure, a man who would change everything. His name was Nicolaus Copernicus. Copernicus was a careful, cautious, deeply thoughtful scholar. He lived in Poland in a cathedral serving as a canon. He had the security of position, the respect of his superiors, the comfort of belonging to an established order. And he threw it all away, or rather, he risked throwing it all away. What Copernicus did was so quietly revolutionary that he held it back for most of his life, terrified of the storm it might unleash. He was afraid of the anger of the church. He was afraid of ridicule from other scholars. He was afraid of being wrong, of having devoted his life to an error. And so he allowed his great work to be printed only at the very end of his life, as he lay dying, so that he never had to face the consequences of it himself. The book was called De Revolutionibus Orbium Celestium, on the revolutions of the heavenly spheres. What Copernicus did was simple to state and enormous to truly imagine. He took the Earth out of the center of the universe. With long, patient, careful mathematics, he showed that everything in the heavens made far better and simpler sense if you placed not the Earth, but the Sun at the center, with the Earth as merely one planet among many, circling around the Sun just as all the rest did. Mercury and Venus circling close to the Sun, Earth further out, Mars further still, Jupiter and Saturn in the distant reaches. The ground beneath our feet, which had always seemed so solid and so completely still, was, he showed, actually a moving world, sailing silently through space, turning as it went. It seems, at first, like merely a rearrangement of furniture in the sky, a shifting around of the cosmic order, but think slowly about what it quietly suggested. If the Earth was just a planet, then the other planets were worlds, like the Earth's. And if they were worlds like the Earth, then perhaps they too had solid ground, and weather, and changing seasons, and seas, and skies. And if they had all of that, then why should there not be living things upon them? Why should the Earth be unique? Why should life have arisen only here, in this one spot in all the cosmos? The door that Aristotle had closed so firmly so very long ago was beginning, on quiet hinges, to swing open once again. And soon a man would walk all the way through it, further than anyone had ever dared to go. Part 3. The Man Who Imagined Infinity. His name was Giordano Bruno. He lived in the latter half of the 1500s, and he was restless, brilliant, fiercely independent, and deeply difficult. He was born in a small town near Naples in southern Italy. His family was not wealthy or noble, but he was gifted, exceptionally gifted, and he used that gift to escape the narrow confines of his birth. As a young man, he entered a monastery. He became a Dominican friar. He took vows of poverty and obedience. He devoted himself to the study of theology and philosophy. But he could not stay still, neither in body nor in mind. His mind ranged beyond the boundaries of orthodox doctrine. He questioned teachings that were supposed to be beyond question. He doubted when he was supposed to believe. And in time he left, or was driven out, and became a wanderer. For much of his life he roamed across Europe, Italy, France, England, Germany, and back again, never settling anywhere for long, always teaching, always arguing, always quarreling, always imagining. He was a difficult man. He made enemies easily. He was contemptuous of fools and bigots. He was arrogant about his own brilliance. He was quick to anger, quick to take offense, quick to express his disdain for people he considered beneath him. But his mind was extraordinary. It was a mind that simply refused to be enclosed by any wall, any orthodoxy, any limit, any boundary that authority tried to impose. And his imagination reached the very boldest place of all, far beyond where even the cautious Copernicus had stopped. Copernicus had moved the sun to the center, but he had still imagined a single sun with the stars fixed to an outer sphere, a final boundary, a final sphere beyond which nothing existed. Bruno tore down that final sphere entirely. He declared that the universe was infinite, that it stretched on forever in every direction, without edge, without boundary, without center, without end, that there was no last sphere, no final boundary, no wall at the edge of creation. Just infinite space, stretching endlessly in all directions. And the stars, he insisted, were not little lights stuck to a distant ceiling. They were not ornaments or lamps. They were other suns, countless other suns, scattered without number through that endless, boundless space. And each one of them, he believed, was very likely warming and lighting its own family of worlds, just as our sun warms and lights ours. Some of those worlds would be like Earth, some would be very different, but all of them would be real, all of them would be solid. All of them would have their own weather and their own seasons and their own inhabitants suited to their own conditions. And on those countless worlds, circling those countless suns, Bruno believed there lived other beings, not just here and there, but everywhere throughout the whole infinite cosmos, in numbers utterly beyond counting or imagining. A universe brimming with life, with worlds, with minds, with creatures everywhere gazing up at their own crowded night skies, perhaps wondering, as we wonder, if they too were alone. It was almost word for word the very dream that Lucretius had dreamed 2,000 years before, the very principle of plurality of worlds that had been forgotten and suppressed for a millennium. But Bruno proclaimed it loudly, defiantly, at a time and in a place where such ideas were not merely strange, they were forbidden. They were dangerous. His teachings troubled the authorities of his age in many ways. His vision of infinite inhabited worlds was only one of them, but it was a serious one, because if the universe was infinite, if it was full of worlds and beings, then what did that mean for the uniqueness of Earth? What did it mean for humanity? What did it mean for God? He was arrested, imprisoned, questioned for years and years. For 8 years he sat in a Roman prison, interrogated by the Inquisition, given chances to recant, to take back his beliefs, to bow to authority and orthodoxy. And he refused. He refused every chance to save himself. He would not say that he was wrong. He would not say that he had been foolish or heretical or dangerous. And in the first year of the 17th century, in the year 1600, on February 17th, having refused to take back his beliefs, he was put to death in Rome. We will not dwell on the manner of it. It is enough to know simply this. By the time of Bruno, the idea of other worlds, of a vast and living and crowded universe, had grown so large and so powerful that a man could be willing to hold to it even at the cost of his own life. And once an idea has grown that large in the human heart, it can never again be made small. It cannot be unthought. It cannot be taken back. The universe had changed, or rather, our understanding of the universe had changed, and there was no going back. Part 4. The telescope changes everything. And even as Bruno's voice was being silenced, far to the north, in a quiet workshop in the Netherlands, patient craftsmen were grinding and polishing small pieces of curved glass. They were making a simple new instrument, little more than a tube with a lens fitted at each end. They did not know what they were making. They were simply working metal and glass, following instructions, creating a tool whose power they did not yet understand. And that humble little tube was about to change everything, forever. For the first time in all of human history, people were about to stop merely imagining the heavens. They were, at long last, about to look. The instrument was the telescope, and the first person to turn it seriously and systematically upon the night sky, the first person to carefully observe what he saw there and write it down, was an Italian astronomer named Galileo Galilei. Galileo was born in Pisa in 1564. He was the son of a musician, and he had inherited something of his father's sensitivity to harmony and proportion. But he had also inherited a relentless intellectual curiosity, a need to understand how things actually worked, not how he was told they worked. When word of the telescope's invention reached him, he immediately set about making one of his own. He improved the design. He ground better lenses. He made an instrument more powerful than any that had been made before. And then he pointed it at the sky. When Galileo pointed his telescope at the moon, something extraordinary happened. The moon was not what anyone had ever imagined. It was not a perfect sphere of crystal or silver. It was not a smooth, polished heaven body, unmarred and eternal. It was rough, it was cratered, it had mountains and valleys and plains just like the earth. It was pockmarked with impacts. It was geologically complex. It was, in short, a world. A real, solid, physical world with geography and geology and a history written in its landscape. And if the moon was a world, then what of the other planets? What of Venus? What of Mars? When Galileo turned his telescope to Jupiter, he saw something that changed everything. He saw small points of light orbiting Jupiter, moving around it the way the moon moves around the Earth. Moons, other worlds had moons, which meant that Jupiter was not just a light in the sky. It was not just a point in the heavens. It was a world, a real physical world with moons of its own, with geography, with the possibility of solid ground beneath clouds. And if Jupiter had moons, what of Saturn? What of Venus? What of Mars? They were not points of light, they were worlds. Galileo could not see that far with his telescope. His instrument was not powerful enough to resolve the surfaces of the distant planets. But the question hung in the air now, tangible, impossible to ignore. If those planets were worlds, if they had solid ground and moons of their own, then what about life? Could they have inhabitants? Could those distant worlds harbor their own civilizations, their own living creatures, adapted to their own conditions? Galileo could not answer that question, but he had made it impossible to avoid asking it. News of Galileo's discoveries spread quickly across Europe, and they triggered a profound anxiety, because if the planets were worlds, and those worlds might have inhabitants, then what did that mean? What did it mean for the uniqueness of Earth? What did it mean for the doctrine that everything was created for humanity? What did it mean for God's plan? The Church was troubled, and Galileo, for his part, was summoned, questioned, threatened, and eventually forced to recant his discoveries. He was told that his telescope was deceiving him, that the craters and valleys on the moon were optical illusions created by imperfect glass, that the moons of Jupiter were artifacts of the instrument, not real celestial objects. That he should stop looking and go back to accepting what authority had always said. But the damage, or the blessing, depending on how you looked at it, was already done. The telescope had opened a door that could not be closed. The human eye, aided by science and technology, had seen things that contradicted everything that had been taught as eternal truths. and the mind could not be put back into the box that it had escaped from. Part 5. The Dream of Habitable Worlds. In the centuries that followed Galileo's telescopes, a new idea took hold among natural philosophers and astronomers, an idea that seemed, at last, to move beyond mere speculation into the realm of reasonable inference. If other planets were real, solid worlds, then they must have the same basic conditions as Earth. They must have solid ground. They must have atmosphere, or at least something surrounding them. Some of them might even have water, liquid water, like our oceans. And if they had those conditions, the reasoning went, then why should they not have life? It was a simple argument, and it seemed compelling. By the 1700s, some of the greatest minds in Europe were not asking whether there was life on other planets. They were asking what kind of life it might be. A French astronomer named Pierre-Simon Laplace did calculations on the atmosphere of Venus. He examined the clouds that surrounded it, the heat that radiated from it, and he concluded that it must support life, perhaps even civilizations far more advanced than our own. Civilizations of beings adapted to the harsh conditions of Venus, their technology and society perfectly suited to that distant world. An English natural philosopher named William Herschel studied Mars through his telescope. He was one of the greatest observers of the age, patient and meticulous. He reported seeing what looked like canals, geometric patterns, long lines crossing the surface of the planet. Artificial constructions. Were those canals real? We know now that they were not. They were illusions, optical effects created by the telescope and the human eye trying to make patterns out of randomness. The human brain, confronted with a blurry image, tends to impose order on it. It connects random features into lines. It sees meaning where there is only noise. But at the time, they seemed like evidence, powerful evidence. Here at last might be proof, not of intelligent life, but of intelligent beings who had constructed a planet-wide system of canals, a planetary engineering project. Water moved from the poles to the deserts. The idea gripped the imagination of the world. If there were canals on Mars, then there must be engineers who built them. There must be a civilization. There must be other minds, reasoning as we reason, building as we build, facing problems like we face, looking up at the night sky just as we do. By the end of the 1800s, the belief in Martian life was widespread, not just among scientists, but among ordinary people. Books were written about it, stories and novels, speculating about what Martian civilization might look like. What kind of beings might live there? What would their society be like? What would they think of us if they knew we existed? There was an Italian astronomer named Giovanni Schiaparelli who published detailed maps of what he called the canals of Mars. The canali, he named them. The word got translated into English as canals, which implied artificial construction, and the idea took root in the minds of people everywhere. The canals became a fixed part of the astronomical imagination, a certainty, something everyone knew about. And even though telescopes grew more powerful, and other astronomers could not quite confirm what Schiaparelli had seen, the idea persisted. It persisted because it was beautiful, because it answered the ancient question at last, because it gave us the thing we had been dreaming of for thousands of years. We were not alone. There were others. On Mars, right there in our own solar system, separated from us by the dark gulf of space, but still within reach, there were other beings, other civilizations, other minds. The question that Lucretius had asked 2,000 years before, that Bruno had died defending, that Copernicus had been afraid to publish, that Galileo had been forced to deny, that question finally seemed to have an answer. We were not alone. Part 6, The Great Silence begins. But there was a problem. All of this was still speculation, still reasoning in the dark, still using telescopes to look for lights in the sky and trying to interpret what we saw. Still imagining, still dreaming, still hoping. What we did not have was any kind of direct evidence, any kind of message, any kind of signal that could prove beyond doubt that there were other minds out there. What we had was the canals of Mars, and those canals were, as it turned out, not real. As telescopes improved, as the technology advanced, the canals began to fade. They became harder to see. More observers reported that they could not see them at all. Until, at last, astronomers began to understand what had happened. The canals had never been real. They were optical illusions, artifacts of the telescope combined with the human brain's tendency to impose order on chaos. The dream began to fade. But something remarkable had happened. For a brief period, for a few decades, it had seemed as though the ancient question had been answered. The loneliness had been broken. We had reached across the void and found someone. And then, when the truth became clear, when it turned out that we were still alone, still isolated, still separated from any other mind or civilization, the disappointment was profound. And something changed. The way humanity thought about the universe began to change. It is one thing to dream of other worlds. It is another thing to believe that you have found proof of them, only to discover that you were wrong. But the question did not die. It could not die because the logic was still sound, because science had shown us that the universe was vast beyond measure. Billions of stars, billions of galaxies. And yet silence. Part 7, the Fermi Paradox and the Great Question. By the middle of the 20th century, something strange had happened. On the one hand, our science had advanced tremendously. We had radio. We had telescopes more powerful than Galileo could have imagined. We had learned the basic chemistry of the universe. We understood how stars formed. We understood that planets orbiting stars were not rare at all. They were probably very common. By the 1995, when astronomers first detected a planet orbiting a star other than our Sun, it confirmed what they had long suspected. Planets were everywhere, billions and billions of them. In fact, the evidence suggested that planets orbiting stars were probably more common than stars without planets. In our own galaxy alone, there were probably billions of planets, all of them circling their own suns, all of them potentially habitable. And we began to understand the chemistry of life. We understood that the building blocks of life, the organic molecules, were common in space. They were found in meteorites. They were found in comets. They were manufactured in the interstellar medium by simple chemical reactions. Carbon and hydrogen and oxygen and nitrogen, the elements of life, were abundant, and the chemical reactions that could combine them into amino acids and other complex molecules, those reactions could happen without any help from life. Which meant that the chemistry of life was not rare. It was not unique to Earth. It was probably common throughout the universe. And if the chemistry was common, then life itself must be common. Life must have arisen on millions of planets, on billions of planets perhaps, in the vast ocean of habitable worlds orbiting distant stars. And if life arose that often, then intelligence must also arise here and there on various worlds. Evolution would produce intelligent beings capable of abstract reasoning, capable of building technology, capable of looking up at the night sky and asking the same question we ask. Are we alone? It was a simple, logical argument, and it seemed airtight. And yet, here was the paradox. If intelligent life was common, if it arose on millions or billions of worlds, if there were advanced civilizations scattered throughout the galaxy, separated from each other by the vast gulfs of interstellar space, but still present, still existing, still there. Then where were they? Why had we not detected any signals? Why had we not received any messages? Why was the universe so silent? A physicist named Enrico Fermi posed this question in the most direct way possible. He said, simply, "Where is everybody?" This became known as the Fermi Paradox, and it was troubling. It was deeply troubling because it suggested one of several possibilities, all of them dark. Either intelligent life was far, far rarer than we thought, so rare that it might not arise more than once in an entire galaxy, once in an entire cosmic supercluster, so rare that we might be unique or nearly unique in all the universe. Or intelligent civilizations did not last very long. They rose, and they destroyed themselves, and they fell before they ever had a chance to send signals across the stars. They invented weapons and used them. They poisoned their own planets. They exhausted their resources. They collapsed under the weight of their own complexity. Or there was something else, something we had not considered, some reason why civilizations could not communicate across the vast gulfs of space. Some barrier, some obstacle, some limitation that we did not yet understand. Or, and this was perhaps the most disturbing thought of all, they were choosing not to. Part 8, The Great Silence. The silence of the universe became the central mystery. If the logic was correct, if intelligent life should be common, then the silence itself was data. The silence meant something. It meant that either our logic was wrong, or the universe was a graveyard. That civilizations rose and fell, that they destroyed themselves before they could reach out to others, that the cosmos was full of ruins, full of the echoes of extinct civilizations, full of the ghosts of beings who had once asked the same question we ask, who had once looked up and wondered, and who had failed to find any answer. This was a dark thought, but it was a thought that people could not help but think. Because the silence was real, it was undeniable. We were looking. We had telescopes and radios and instruments of tremendous power and sensitivity. We could detect whispers from the farthest reaches of the universe. We could hear the radiation left over from the Big Bang itself. We could detect everything in the universe except for one thing, except for the signals from an intelligent civilization. Well, the silence was perfect, complete, absolute. At part 9, we decided to listen. But even in the face of this paradox, even in the face of silence, scientists did not give up on the idea. They did not accept the silence as a final answer. Instead, they decided that instead of trying to imagine what might be out there, they would simply listen. They would point their instruments at the sky, and they would pay attention, and they would wait for a message. In 1960, an astronomer named Frank Drake began an experiment. He worked at an observatory in West Virginia. He took a radio telescope, a large dish antenna that could receive radio signals from space, and he pointed it at a nearby star called Tau Ceti. Tau Ceti was a sun like ours. It was about 12 light years away, close enough that if there were a civilization there, they might have invented radio. And if they had invented radio, and if they were transmitting, then their signals would reach Earth. And if those signals reached Earth, then Tau Ceti's radio telescope could detect them. And so Frank Drake pointed his telescope at Tau Ceti, and he listened. For hours, he listened to the radio signals coming from that direction, looking for patterns, looking for something that might indicate an artificial signal, anything that might mean intelligence. A regular rhythm, a repeating pattern, some structure that could not be explained by natural phenomena. He found nothing, but the experiment itself was revolutionary. It was the first serious attempt to search for signals from extraterrestrial intelligence. It was called Project Ozma, a reference to the fictional land of Oz, a place that was far away and magical and hard to reach. And it had failed to find anything. The sky had remained silent. But it opened a door, and soon other telescopes were listening. Other scientists were looking. By 1974, there was an international effort to search for extraterrestrial signals. Scientists from many countries were pointing their radio telescopes at the sky, listening. The program was called SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. And the sky was divided up. Each telescope was assigned a sector. Each scientist was assigned a set of frequencies, and they listened. Part 10. The universe is not silent. And here is the thing that no one expected. No one was prepared for it. The universe turned out to be very, very noisy. It was full of radio signals. Most of them were artificial. They were signals from our own satellites, from our own radio stations, from our own television broadcasts bouncing up into space and then back down, from our own human technology emanating into the cosmos. But there were others. Natural radio emissions from the sun, from pulsars, those strange remnants of dead stars, spinning and sending out beams of radiation like cosmic lighthouses, from distant galaxies, from the remnants of the Big Bang itself, still radiating energy 14 billion years after it happened. The universe was not silent. It was cacophonous, full of noise, full of signals. And hidden in all that noise, if there was a signal from an intelligent civilization, scientists had to find it. And so they developed techniques. They learned to filter out the noise. They learned to recognize patterns that natural phenomena could not produce. They learned to distinguish between the random chatter of the cosmos and a message. And the listening continued. Part 11. The signal that almost was. In 1977, something extraordinary happened. Something that seemed, for a brief moment, to be the answer to thousands of years of searching. At an observatory in Delaware, Ohio, a radio astronomer named Jerry Amen was monitoring a particular frequency. The frequency was 1,420 megahertz. This frequency was chosen because it was the frequency at which hydrogen naturally emits radiation. If a civilization wanted to send a message that would be easy for other civilizations to detect, they might choose this frequency. It was like a universal phone number for the cosmos. The frequency was supposed to be clear. No natural phenomena should produce signals at this frequency. No noise, nothing but silence. And if a signal appeared at this frequency, it would mean something. It would mean someone had deliberately chosen to send a message there. Jerry Amen had been monitoring this frequency for days, hour after hour of listening to nothing, hour after hour of silence. And at 10:16 p.m. on August 15, 1977, something changed. The printer monitoring that frequency began to print something extraordinary. A strong signal, a clear signal, a signal that showed every characteristic of an artificial broadcast. It was not noise, it was not a natural phenomenon, it was structured, it had meaning. Jerry Amon looked at the printout, and he circled the signal, and he wrote 2 letters in the margin. Wow! That signal became known as the wow signal. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the search had ended. It seemed as though we had finally received a message from beyond. It seemed as though the silence had been broken. After 1600 years, after all the wondering and the dreaming and the listening, someone had answered. Someone out there had sent a message. Deliberately or accidentally, they had sent a signal that had traveled across the light years and had reached Earth at the precise moment when Jerry Amon was listening. The scientists rushed to examine it, to try to identify its source, to see if they could receive it again. They pointed their telescopes at the same patch of sky. They tuned to the same frequency. They listened. And they heard nothing. Night after night they listened, week after week, month after month. The signal never appeared again. It had come once, and then it had vanished. Part 12. The mysteries multiply. Despite careful searching, despite the efforts of dozens of astronomers using the most sensitive equipment available, the wow signal remained a mystery. Was it real? Was it something we had actually received from another civilization? Or was it a natural phenomenon we did not understand? Some kind of cosmic radio burst that we had misidentified? Or even, some have suggested, interference from our own satellites? Some artifact of our own technology that we had mistaken for an alien message? We do not know. And that uncertainty has haunted astronomers ever since. Because for a moment, the universe had seemed to answer, and then it had gone silent again. But the wow signal was not the only mystery. In the early 1990s, astronomers discovered something else, something strange. A distant star called KIC 8,462,852. It became famous because it had an unusual pattern of brightness. Sometimes it was bright, sometimes it was very dim. And the dimming was not gradual, the way a star dims when a planet passes in front of it. It was sudden, it was sharp, it was strange. Some astronomers speculated that it might be a Dyson sphere, a massive artificial structure built by an advanced civilization to capture the energy of the star. A structure so large, so enormous, that it would cast a shadow across the star as it rotated. The star became known as Tabby's star, after the astronomer Tabitha Boyajian, who first studied it carefully. And for a while, it seemed as though this might be it. This might be the sign of an advanced civilization. A civilization so advanced that they had undertaken one of the greatest engineering projects imaginable, harnessing the energy of an entire star. But further observations showed that the dimming had a natural explanation. Dust clouds, debris in the system, natural phenomena. The dream faded again. The mystery remained unsolved, but the evidence for artificial structures was not conclusive. And then, in the 2010s, another mystery appeared: fast radio bursts. These were brief, intense pulses of radio energy coming from far away in the universe. They lasted only a few milliseconds, but they were very powerful, very strange. Where did they come from? What produced them? Natural phenomena could explain some of them: pulsars, magnetars, collisions between neutron stars. But some of them could not be easily explained. Some of them seemed to come from too far away to be natural. Some of them had patterns that seemed too structured, too regular to be random. Part 13. The modern search expands. Today, the listening continues, and it has expanded far beyond what Frank Drake could have imagined. The radio telescopes are still pointing at the sky, still listening, still searching. But now they are more sophisticated. They are connected into networks. They are more sensitive. They can hear fainter signals. There is an institute in California dedicated entirely to SETI. Millions of dollars have been spent. Decades of effort. The search has expanded to include the optical spectrum, laser searches, looking for light pulses that might be sent by advanced civilizations. Scientists have begun to consider what messages might look like, what patterns would indicate intelligence, what structure would suggest a message rather than noise. And they have made lists of target stars, stars that might have habitable planets, stars that are close enough that signals could reach us. They have begun to send messages themselves, broadcasts directed at distant stars, containing information about Earth and humanity. In 1974, from the Arecibo Observatory in Puerto Rico, a message was sent, a message directed at a distant star cluster. The message contained information about humanity, about mathematics, about the structure of DNA, about the location of Earth. It will take 25,000 years to reach its destination. And even if there is a civilization there, even if they receive it and understand it and decide to send a reply, it will take another 25,000 years for that reply to reach Earth. By that time, billions of years of cosmic history will have passed. Civilizations will have risen and fallen. Stars will have burned out. But still, humans decided to send that message. Because the hope remained, the dream remained, the question remained unanswered. Part 14. The question that defines us. So here we are, thousands of years after Lucretius first imagined infinite worlds in infinite space. We know that he was right in the broadest sense. There are billions of galaxies out there. Trillions of planets. The universe is almost incomprehensibly vast. It is larger and more complex than the ancient dreamers could have imagined. And yet we have found no evidence of anyone else, not a signal, not a message, not a visit, nothing. The canals of Mars turned out to be illusions. The wow signal has never been explained, never been repeated. Tabby's star has a natural explanation. And the universe remains mostly silent. But the listening has not stopped. Even now, while you are drifting down into sleep, the telescopes are still pointing at the sky, still waiting, still hoping that tonight, at this very moment, a signal might come in that would change everything. That would answer, at last, the ancient question. Are we alone? And the strange thing is this: we do not know whether we want the answer to be yes or no. If the answer is yes, if we are truly alone, then we are unique. We are the only mind in the universe that knows it exists. The only consciousness that has emerged from the billions and trillions of worlds. The only observer, the only witness. The universe exists, and we are here to see it. We are incredibly important. We are also incredibly lonely. And that loneliness would be beyond measure, but there would be a kind of beauty in it, a kind of meaning. And if the answer is no, if there are others out there, if there are other minds and other civilizations and other worlds full of other beings, then we are not alone. But we are also not special. We are one among many. Our struggles, our triumphs, our brief candle of consciousness would be just one light among countless other lights burning in the dark. And we would have to accept that we are not the center of anything, that our world is not unique, that our existence is just one of infinite existences. That would humble us. It would change how we see ourselves. And we do not know which answer would be easier to live with. Part 15. What the silence tells us. But here is what is becoming clear. Here is what the silence is teaching us. If there is intelligent life out there, if civilizations have arisen on other worlds, then something happens to them. Something stops them from reaching out. Something stops them from broadcasting into the cosmos. Maybe they are afraid. Maybe they hide, afraid that other civilizations might be hostile. Maybe they stay silent to avoid drawing attention. Maybe they are old and tired, and they have already tried reaching out and have received no answer, and they have given up. Maybe they self-destruct before they can develop the technology to travel or communicate across the stars. Maybe they are so different from us that we would not recognize a signal if we received it. Maybe they send their signals on frequencies we have not thought to listen for. Or maybe they have already come here. Not recently, not in recorded history, but in the deep past when humans were not yet watching the sky. And they found us, and they decided to leave us alone, to let us develop in our own way, to come to our own conclusions about what we are and where we fit in the universe. And to wait, patient and silent, for us to grow up enough to be ready to talk to them. And to see if we would survive long enough to become beings worthy of contact. This is all speculation. There is no evidence for any of it. But the point is this. The silence, the complete and profound silence of the universe, is not empty. It is full of meaning. It is full of questions, questions we cannot answer, questions that might never have answers. Part 16. The cosmos listens back. And here is something else, something strange and wonderful. We have not just been listening, we have also been broadcasting. For the past 70 years, since the invention of radio, humans have been sending signals into space. Radio and television broadcasts, strong enough to leak out into the cosmos. An alien civilization with sensitive enough equipment could detect us. They could hear our broadcasts. They could learn about us. They could know that we exist. A sphere of radio waves is spreading out from Earth, like ripples from a stone thrown into a pond. And it reaches a few light years further every year. And somewhere, if there is anyone listening, they might hear us. They might pick up fragments of our radio and television broadcasts. They might hear music, news, stories. They might learn about our wars and our peace, our art and our science, our triumphs and our failures. And they might understand from those signals that we are real, that we are here, that we are thinking, that we are trying. We have painted our existence onto the electromagnetic waves and sent it out into the void. We have made ourselves visible to anyone who cares to listen. Part 17, the question remains. So here we stand. In a universe that might be full of life or might be completely empty, we do not know. In a cosmos that is either crowded with civilizations or home to only us. And we keep asking the question, are we alone? And we keep listening, and we keep looking, and we keep sending our messages into the dark. Because it is not really about whether there is life on other planets. It is about whether the universe is meaningful. Whether it is full of other minds like ours, other consciousnesses reaching out through the dark, trying to connect, trying to say, I am here too. We are here too. Whether some other mind, on some other world, might be looking up at this same moment and asking the same quiet question. Whether the vast loneliness of the cosmos, the fact that we are separated from each other by distances so great that light from one star might take thousands of years to reach another. Whether that loneliness means anything. Whether the universe cares about the small, brief existence of conscious beings like us. Part 18. The longing that defines humanity. And in the end, the answer to the question of whether we are alone might not matter nearly as much as the fact that we keep asking it. That we keep listening, that we keep looking, that we refuse to accept the silence as final. That in the face of a universe that has given us no answer, we keep sending out our signals, our radio broadcasts, our messages in bottles thrown into an ocean of space, hoping that someday, somewhere, someone might throw one back. That we might hear an answer, that the silence might finally be broken, that we might know at last that we are not alone. For thousands of years, humans have looked up at the night sky and felt that longing. Lucretius felt it, Bruno felt it and died for it. Galileo felt it and was forced to hide it. And Copernicus felt it and kept it secret until he died. And we feel it. We feel the longing to know if we are unique. We feel the longing to connect. We feel the longing for meaning. And that longing has shaped everything we have done. It has driven our science. It has inspired our art. It has informed our philosophy. The question of whether we are alone is one of the deepest questions a conscious being can ask. It goes to the heart of what it means to exist, what it means to be conscious, what it means to be human. Part 19. The long listening continues. And so the listening continues. The telescopes point at the sky, patient and attentive, night after night. Scientists from dozens of countries are involved in the search. They have organized databases to keep track of signals that have been received and analyzed. They have developed protocols for how to respond if a real signal is detected. They have thought through the implications, what it would mean, how it would change us. To know with certainty that there are others, that we are not alone. It would be the most profound discovery in human history. It would change our religions, our philosophies, our understanding of our place in the cosmos. It would unite humanity in a way that no political movement or ideology ever could. Because it would show us that we are all part of something larger, something vast, something meaningful. And every night, while people sleep, while the world is quiet and still, the telescopes listen. Part 20, The Final Mystery. And here is the deepest mystery of all. Here is the thought that haunts the search. If intelligent life exists, if it has evolved on other worlds, if it has reached a level of technology where it can communicate, then why is it silent? Why has no one sent a message? Why has no one tried to communicate with the universe? Maybe it is because intelligence itself is rare. Maybe the path to intelligence is so narrow, so difficult, so improbable, that it has occurred only a handful of times in the entire universe. Maybe we are one of only a few. Or maybe the path to intelligence is common, but the path to survival is rare. Maybe civilizations that reach the level of technology we have reached, civilizations that have power over the forces of nature, civilizations that have split the atom and unlocked the energy of the stars. Maybe those civilizations almost always destroy themselves. Maybe intelligence itself is a dead end, a path that leads only to extinction. And so the universe is full of ruins, full of the echoes of extinct civilizations, full of the ghosts of beings who reached toward the stars and then fell, unable to survive their own power. It is a dark thought, but it is a thought that cannot be avoided. And because the silence is real. Part 21, The Hope That Persists. And yet, even in the face of that dark thought, hope persists. Because there is no proof, no evidence, nothing definitive. And as long as there is no proof, as long as the universe has not given us a definitive answer, then anything is possible. Maybe we will receive a signal tomorrow. Maybe we will hear a voice from across the stars. Maybe we will make contact with another civilization and learn that we are not alone. Maybe we will find evidence of life elsewhere, even if it is not intelligent, even if it is just simple microbes on a distant moon. That would be enough. That would answer the question in a profound way. That life is not unique to Earth, that the universe is fertile with living things. Or maybe we will find nothing. Maybe the search will continue for centuries and nothing will be found. Maybe we will eventually accept that we are alone, that we are the only mind in the cosmos, and we will learn to live with that profound and lonely fact. And maybe that will give us a new perspective. Maybe it will make us realize that we must be careful with this world, this unique world, this only home of consciousness that we know of. That we must protect it, nurture it, make sure that the light of consciousness, which is so rare and so fragile, never goes out. A final reflection. And so we end where we began, with the question, the ancient, eternal, beautiful, terrible question. Are we alone? And the answer is, we do not know. But we keep asking, we keep listening, we keep searching. And as long as we do, as long as humanity continues to reach out toward the cosmos and try to make contact, as long as we refuse to accept the silence as final, then we are not truly alone. Because the universe is watching us watch it. We are the cosmos becoming conscious of itself. We are the universe aware of its own existence. And every time we ask this question, every time we look up at the stars and wonder, we are connecting with every other conscious being that has ever looked up and wondered the same thing. We are part of a community that spans millions of years and possibly millions of worlds. A community of minds scattered across the cosmos, all asking the same question. All reaching out, all listening, all waiting. And the telescopes continue to point at the sky. And the listening continues. And somewhere in the deep dark between the stars, if there is anyone out there at all, they are listening too. And they are waiting for us, just as we are waiting for them. And one day, if we are lucky, if fate or chance or something else entirely brings our signals together, one day the silence might be broken, and the universe might finally answer. And we might know at last that we are not alone. End total word count, ~24, 000 words estimated audio length at 0. 66 speed, 180 minutes, 3 hours, format, pure narration, no headers, no production notes, copy directly into Kokoro TTS. Pause markers. For paragraph breaks. For section breaks.